For years, millions of viewers welcomed Daystar into their homes, believing they were watching a ministry built on faith, integrity, and truth. The people who appeared on their television screens were not simply broadcasters. They were spiritual leaders, trusted voices who encouraged families through life's greatest joys and deepest struggles. That unique relationship created a bond unlike that of traditional television personalities. When these leaders celebrated victories, viewers celebrated with them. When they asked for prayer, audiences prayed. And when they spoke about personal hardships, people believed what they were told. That is why renewed questions surrounding Joni Lamb's health have become far more than a discussion about a medical diagnosis. They have become a conversation about trust, transparency, and whether viewers were given the complete picture during the final chapter of her life. Many people remember the emotional moment when viewers were told why Joni had been absent from the program. The explanation sounded straightforward.
I want you to pray for Joni. You may have noticed that she hasn't been on the show recently. She injured her back recently and is healing from 2 hairline fractures on her spine, the T11 and L1. And if you've ever experienced anything in your spine, you know that it hurts. And she's recovering, but it's probably going to take several weeks for her to get back to where she was. So please, I want you to pray for her. And, Rachel.
She had suffered hairline fractures in her spine and was taking time to recover. Those speaking on her behalf described a painful but manageable injury. They spoke of healing, rest, optimism, and patience. Viewers were encouraged to pray, believing that, although recovery would take time, she was expected to improve. Family members reinforced that message. Rachel spoke warmly about her mother's determination, describing someone who always wanted to keep pressing forward despite physical challenges. Doug echoed that optimism, thanking viewers for their prayers while assuring everyone that Joni was doing better and simply needed additional time to heal. For the overwhelming majority of viewers, there was little reason to question those statements. Serious back injuries can require months of recovery. Hairline fractures in the spine are painful, and it seemed completely reasonable that someone would step away from television while healing. Many supporters responded exactly as they were asked to do. They prayed faithfully, sent messages of encouragement, and waited for the day Joni would return. But as time passed and later events unfolded, some critics began asking a very different question. Were viewers simply given a limited explanation to protect a family's privacy, or were they presented with a carefully managed narrative that concealed a much more serious medical reality? That question now sits at the center of an ongoing debate that continues to divide observers. According to allegations raised by critics and commentators, Joni's health situation may have been far more severe than audiences were led to believe. They argue that while the public was focused on spinal fractures and rehabilitation, a much more serious diagnosis was allegedly already known within the family. If those allegations are accurate, the distinction becomes significant. There is an important difference between choosing to keep certain medical details private and offering an explanation that leads audiences toward a fundamentally different understanding of someone's condition. No public figure is obligated to reveal every diagnosis, every doctor's report, or every aspect of a personal medical journey. Privacy remains an important right, particularly during moments of serious illness. Families facing devastating news often need time to process difficult realities before sharing them publicly. However, critics argue that once a specific explanation is given, especially one designed to reassure supporters, it naturally invites scrutiny if later events suggest that the full situation was considerably more serious than originally presented. That is the heart of this controversy. The issue is not whether Joni deserved privacy. The issue is whether viewers were encouraged to believe she was recovering from one condition while another, potentially life-threatening illness, remained undisclosed. Supporters of the family see the situation differently. They argue that medical journeys are rarely simple. Prognoses change. Treatments evolve. Doctors sometimes offer hope even in extremely difficult circumstances. Families often choose to focus on faith instead of fear, emphasizing healing rather than worst-case scenarios. From that perspective, discussing spinal injuries may have reflected one genuine aspect of her condition without necessarily requiring public disclosure of every other diagnosis. But critics maintain that the overall message conveyed to viewers painted a picture of temporary recovery rather than an individual confronting a much more serious medical battle. As Joni's health continued to decline, many viewers naturally began revisiting those earlier broadcasts. Statements that once sounded reassuring suddenly appeared different. The comments about rest and healing were re-examined. References to gradual improvement were questioned. Expressions of confidence became the subject of renewed debate. In hindsight, some people began asking whether they had been encouraged to expect a recovery that was never realistically possible. Whether that conclusion is fair remains a matter of intense disagreement. What cannot be denied is that Joni's passing fundamentally changed how many people interpreted those earlier broadcasts. Death has a unique way of reshaping public memory. Words that once inspired hope are often revisited through an entirely different lens. Predictions are measured against outcomes. Assurances are reconsidered. Questions that once seemed unnecessary suddenly become unavoidable. This is precisely what has happened here. Another element fueling the controversy involves Rachel's public comments during her mother's illness. She described Joni as someone who simply refused to quit. Anyone familiar with Joni's personality could easily recognize that description. She had spent decades building one of the world's largest Christian television networks alongside her late husband, Marcus Lamb. Perseverance had long been part of her public identity. Rachel spoke affectionately about her mother's determination, explaining that Joni wanted to continue working, continue serving, and continue moving forward despite physical pain. Viewed on its own, there is nothing unusual about such statements. Families frequently celebrate the resilience of loved ones battling illness. Those messages often provide hope not only for supporters, but also for the individual facing difficult medical challenges. Yet critics argue that those words now carry additional weight if family members already understood the full severity of her condition. They question whether viewers would have interpreted those encouraging remarks differently had they known the complete medical picture. Again, the debate is not about whether hope should exist. Hope belongs in every difficult season. The debate centers on whether hope should be presented without acknowledging realities that substantially change public understanding. Adding emotional depth to the story were repeated references to family support. Viewers heard about grandchildren encouraging Joni. Stories of loved ones rallying around her reinforced the image of a close-knit family standing together through a difficult season. Those moments resonated deeply because they reflected experiences familiar to countless families. Children drawing pictures, grandchildren offering hugs, relatives gathering around hospital beds. These are scenes that transcend celebrity and connect people through shared human experience. For many viewers, those stories strengthened emotional investment. People were not simply watching television anymore. They felt connected to the journey. That emotional connection explains why allegations of incomplete communication have generated such passionate reactions. When audiences believe they have shared in someone's struggle, they also expect honesty about the nature of that struggle. Disappointment often becomes much deeper when trust feels compromised. The controversy extends beyond medical information. The questions have also emerged regarding communication within the family itself. Some commentators have suggested that not every family member may have fully understood the extent of Joni's illness during critical periods. Attention has frequently focused on Jonathan Lamb and Susie Lamb. These claims remain allegations, and definitive evidence has not been publicly established. Nevertheless, the discussion itself highlights another painful dimension of the story. Serious illness places enormous strain on families. Clear communication becomes essential. Loved ones rely upon one another for emotional support, decision-making, and preparation for whatever lies ahead. Whenever questions arise about whether everyone shared the same understanding of a medical situation, those questions naturally become deeply personal. Instead of remaining a public relations issue, the conversation shifts into the realm of family relationships, trust, and heartbreak. Some observers caution against drawing conclusions without verified evidence. Others argue that the very existence of conflicting narratives illustrates why transparency matters so much. When information is limited, speculation often rushes in to fill the gaps. Weiss has also become part of the broader discussion. Critics have revisited statements he made during this period, asking whether his public assurances accurately reflected the reality behind the scenes. Others argue that assigning responsibility to one individual oversimplifies a much larger story involving multiple leaders and long-standing organizational challenges. Indeed, many observers note that Daystar's recent controversies did not begin with Joni's illness. For years, questions have surrounded leadership decisions, family disagreements, succession planning, and internal conflict. Those earlier disputes have shaped how audiences interpret every new development. When trust has already been weakened by previous controversies, even sincere explanations may struggle to regain public confidence. That reality presents a difficult challenge for any organization. Every statement becomes filtered through past experiences. Every explanation is measured against previous controversies. Every unanswered question creates room for additional speculation. Religious organizations face an especially unique burden in this regard. Unlike commercial businesses, ministries ask people to trust not only their competence, but also their moral character. Their credibility rests on more than successful programming or financial performance. It rests on values, honesty, integrity, accountability, truthfulness. When audiences perceive a gap between those values and public communication, reactions tend to be stronger than they might be elsewhere. Supporters of the family emphasize compassion. They remind observers that no family handles devastating illness perfectly. Medical crises are emotionally exhausting. Decisions about what to share publicly become incredibly difficult. Hope often exists alongside uncertainty. No one can fully understand those private moments unless they have lived them. Critics acknowledge those realities while arguing that compassion and accountability are not mutually exclusive. Families deserve grace. At the same time, organizations built upon public trust must recognize the responsibility that accompanies that trust. Perhaps that is the lasting lesson emerging from this entire controversy. The discussion ultimately reaches far beyond one diagnosis, one family, or one television network. It forces broader questions about leadership during moments of crisis. How much should public figures disclose? When does protecting privacy become withholding information? Can selective disclosure unintentionally create misunderstanding? What responsibilities do faith-based organizations owe to supporters who faithfully pray, donate, and place confidence in their leaders? These questions have no simple answers. Every family will approach them differently. Every organization will wrestle with competing responsibilities. Yet one principle continues to emerge throughout this conversation. Trust is extraordinarily difficult to build and remarkably easy to lose. It develops over years through consistent honesty. It strengthens when words align with reality. It becomes most valuable during moments of uncertainty. And once doubt begins to take root, restoring confidence becomes an incredibly challenging task. Whether one believes Daystar acted appropriately under extraordinarily difficult circumstances or believes viewers deserved a more complete understanding of Joni's condition, the debate has already left a lasting impact. Years from now, people may remember this controversy less for the specific medical questions involved and more for the larger issues it exposed. It became a discussion about transparency, about accountability, about family communication, about institutional credibility. and about the unique responsibility carried by organizations that ask millions of people to place not only their attention, but also their faith in those who lead them. The conversation surrounding Joni Lamb's final months continues because it speaks to something much larger than one individual story. It reminds every public institution that credibility is not maintained simply by managing difficult moments. It is maintained by earning confidence through openness, consistency, and integrity, especially when circumstances become painful and uncertain. For ministries whose influence is built upon moral authority, those principles are not optional. They are the very foundation upon which lasting trust is established, and once that foundation begins to crack, every future explanation faces a much steeper climb toward belief.